The morning after the confrontation, Oak Ridge Estates was uneasy. The whisper of the previous night's events traveled faster than the wind. Neighbors who had only glanced at Samuel's porch before now lingered at windows, mouths pressed against glass, watching him move deliberately across his yard. The flag above him fluttered as if waving at them, a reminder that he had not bent, had not knelt, had not given a single inch to the trio who thought they could shame him. Karen Delaney, perched in her SUV with Wallace riding shotgun and Harlow fuming behind them, seethed silently. They had expected to humiliate Samuel, to post pictures and claim victory on social media. Instead, they had been humiliated. The whole neighborhood had seen it, and thanks to someone's phone, the entire town had seen it too. Samuel Carter, the man they tried to crush, stood taller than ever. "Do you realize what he just did?" Karen hissed, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Wallace leaned back, fingering his gavel nervously. "Yes, and we have to act. He's become a symbol. People will rally to him. We can't allow that." Harlow slammed his fists against the dashboard. "I'll make him regret this. He thinks he's untouchable just because he's old. I'll find a way to break him, I swear it." Samuel, meanwhile, sat on his porch, quietly tending to his roses, his mind moving faster than the chaos around him. He remembered every lesson from his decades of service: patience, observation, strategy. He knew these people. They were predictable. They would strike hard, strike unfairly, strike with everything they had, and he had to be ready. The next day, the first wave came in subtle ways. Notices of code violations slid into his mailbox. A neighbor reported suspicious activity, claiming Samuel had threatened them with a weapon, a complete fabrication. Utilities were suddenly interrupted, each service citing minor issues or maintenance. The bank called, claiming an error in his mortgage account, threatening penalties. Every move was designed to wear him down, to isolate him, to make him feel vulnerable. Samuel ignored most of it, but he didn't ignore everything. He answered the letters calmly, documented every interaction, and quietly contacted veterans from his unit, old brothers and sisters who understood loyalty in ways civilians couldn't. Within hours, trucks arrived delivering water, generators, and legal support. Volunteers came to help him maintain his yard, board up windows, repair damages. Every strike against him became a rallying cry, drawing more people to his side. Inside their respective offices, Karen, Wallace, and Harlow grew more desperate. Every attempt to intimidate him backfired. Every lie they spread was countered with truth. Every fabricated charge met with overwhelming support. Their own allies began to doubt them, some refusing to touch the case. Samuel's calm defiance and the growing army of supporters created cracks in their carefully constructed power. One afternoon, Karen stormed into Wallace's chambers. "We need to escalate. He's making a mockery of us. The HOA, your court, the police, everything is collapsing under him. We need something more direct." Wallace, pale with anger, tapped his gavel against the desk. "Then we take the law into our hands. Not outside the law, mind you, legally, but aggressively. Drag him to court, make him unstable in public. Make him look like the menace they think he is." Harlow leaned forward, the veins in his neck bulging. "And if that doesn't work?" Wallace's eyes darkened. "Then we invent a crisis. Something that will force him to bend, something that will humiliate him where no one can help." Meanwhile, Samuel prepared. He trained quietly, walking his property every day, anticipating every possible move. He spoke to his veterans network, coordinating legal counsel, security, and communications. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from comrades willing to help, old soldiers who had fought beside him and still understood what standing firm meant. The day the court hearing was scheduled, Oak Ridge Estates transformed into a battlefield of principle. Crowds lined the streets, veterans in uniform and civilian clothes alike, friends, neighbors, and supporters from other towns who had heard of Samuel's stand. Reporters thronged the sidewalks, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. It wasn't just about Samuel anymore. It was about defiance, honor, and the refusal to bow to corruption and hatred.
Inside the courthouse, Wallace prepared his speech, practicing the lines he had written to paint Samuel as a dangerous, uncooperative, and potentially violent man. Harlow and Karen sat beside him, smirking, confident they had crafted a perfect trap. They had no idea that Samuel's department extended far beyond their imagination. When Samuel entered the courtroom, he did not walk alone. He was flanked by veterans of every branch, each carrying the quiet weight of experience and loyalty. Their presence was a statement. They did not move, did not speak, did not flinch. They simply stood, a living wall of honor, shielding Samuel from the attacks of corruption. He approached the bench with dignity, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh lights, his eyes steady. Wallace tried to interrupt, to speak over him, to assert his control. But the room was no longer his. Samuel's calm voice carried through the gallery. "I stand accused of disturbing the peace, of threatening my neighbors, of resisting your authority. But the truth is, I have fought for peace. I have stood where bullets fell and men died beside me. I do not kneel for fear. I do not bow to corruption. I do not bend to hatred, and neither will those who stand with me." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, and the whispers of awe filled every corner. Wallace's face flushed red, Harlow's fists clenched, and Karen's smile faltered. The symbol of their power had been shattered in a single, unwavering statement. After the hearing, outside on the courthouse steps, Samuel addressed the crowd. "You wanted me on my knees," he said, voice carrying over the cheering throng, "but instead you've inspired every man, woman, and child here to stand with me. You've turned my home into a battleground, but it is not mine alone. It belongs to every soldier, every veteran, every citizen who refuses to bow to injustice." The crowd roared, waving flags, cameras broadcasting live across the nation. News outlets picked up the story instantly. "Decorated veteran defies HOA, judge and racist cop. Army stands beside him." That night, as Samuel returned home, he knew the war was far from over. The trio had been humiliated, yes, but they were calculating, dangerous, and relentless. There would be more strikes, more traps, more attempts to crush him. But he also knew one truth: he was never alone. The first night of quiet preparation stretched into weeks. Samuel met with his network, coordinated security, rehearsed every possible scenario, and trained with renewed vigor. Every challenge made him sharper. Every attempt against him only strengthened his resolve. Then came the night when they tried again. Harlow arrived with 2 deputies and Karen trailing behind, determined to drag Samuel from his home, to humiliate him, to finally kneel him. But Samuel was ready. The street filled instantly, veterans and neighbors forming a protective wall. Harlow barked orders, threatened arrest, but the presence of trained soldiers, their eyes unwavering, turned his words hollow. Samuel stood on his porch, cane in hand, voice calm but firm. "You wanted me on my knees? You'll have to go through all of us first." Harlow froze. Karen's face twisted with fury, Wallace powerless from miles away. And Samuel Carter, the old black veteran, the man who had faced fire and death countless times, smiled quietly to himself. The message was clear. He was not a man to be broken. He was an army. Oak Ridge Estates had changed forever. Lines had been drawn, alliances forged, and the stage set for the ultimate confrontation. Part 1 ended not with a victory, but with the promise of one. The corrupt, the entitled, the racist, they would strike again. But Samuel Carter and his army would be ready. Oak Ridge Estates woke to a tension heavier than any storm. The manicured lawns and quiet streets no longer held that same false serenity. Samuel Carter's stand on the courthouse steps had reverberated farther than anyone anticipated. Across town, whispers of his defiance traveled like wildfire. He wouldn't kneel. The army stood with him. Even the judge couldn't silence him. Karen Delaney's anger had metastasized into obsession. Every morning she checked social media feeds, her fingers twitching over her phone like she could swipe the defiance away. Every neighbor who dared to leave a friendly wave on Samuel's porch became a target for her passive-aggressive notes, subtle threats, and carefully calibrated rumors. But nothing she did could reverse the narrative. Harlow, meanwhile, fumed. Each day he scoured reports, hoping to catch Samuel off guard, to find some vulnerability. He stationed himself near the property, monitoring comings and goings, but even he began to sense the futility. Every move he made was countered, every attempt blocked by veterans who knew his tactics before he acted.
Wallace, isolated in his chambers, had begun making calls to higher powers, trying to leverage influence. But with every request, Samuel's story had gained more traction. National news outlets had begun covering the saga. Samuel's defiance wasn't just local. It had become a symbol of standing against corruption, entitlement, and hatred. Samuel, however, did not gloat. He moved quietly, deliberately. He strengthened his home's defenses, coordinating with veterans to patrol in shifts, monitor the neighborhood, and create an unbreakable network. He also began planning offensives, not in violence, but in strategy. Each legal move, each public statement, each appearance was carefully crafted to expose the trio without stooping to their level. The first strike came in the form of paperwork. Harrington filed for an emergency injunction, claiming Samuel's property was a public nuisance, that the flag endangered the mental well-being of neighbors, that his presence constituted harassment. The court accepted it, setting a hearing just a week away. Karen and Harlow smirked, convinced they had forced Samuel into submission. He walked into the courthouse that morning, calm and unshaken. Behind him stood a sea of veterans, their medals glinting, their expressions solemn but unyielding. Wallace attempted to shout him down, to assert authority, but the room had already shifted. The judge's words were now weighed against decades of courage and service that no gavel could suppress. Samuel addressed the court, voice steady and resonant. "You call this a nuisance. I call it a home. You call this defiance. I call it dignity. You call it disturbance. I call it a commitment to every soldier, every veteran, every citizen who believes that justice and truth are not negotiable." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Wallace's face grew redder by the second. Karen's teeth clenched. Harlow's fists trembled. Samuel's words had done more than defend himself. They had inspired a movement. That night, outside his home, the first real test arrived. Harlow returned, this time with a squad, intending to arrest Samuel, serve fines, and intimidate him into compliance. Karen followed with cameras, hoping to capture what she believed would be Samuel's humiliation. But the streets were lined. Neighbors, veterans, even strangers who had followed the story online formed a human wall. They chanted, shouted, and stood firm. Harlow barked orders, threatened arrest, tried to break the line. But each time, Samuel's network anticipated the move, positioning themselves to protect him. Harlow took a step forward, hand on his holster, teeth gritted. "I'll arrest all of you," he shouted. A voice rang out from the crowd, calm but commanding. "Try it." It was Lieutenant Marcus Steele, a retired officer who had served alongside Samuel in the Gulf. His voice carried authority. Veterans behind him adjusted their stances, ready. Harlow's squad faltered. Even the deputies began to hesitate, uncertainty replacing the rigid certainty they had felt entering Samuel's property. Karen hissed, furious, whispering to Wallace, "We can't let him do this. We have to find another way." Samuel stood on his porch, cane in hand, calm as ever. He watched the trio retreat, knowing this was only the beginning. Their strikes would become more cunning, more dangerous, but so would his defense and countermeasures. Over the following weeks, the battle shifted into the digital and legal arenas. False reports, attempted subpoenas, and online smears came flying at Samuel. But each was met with evidence, testimony from veterans, and public support that grew exponentially. Every attempt to isolate him failed. Instead, each act of aggression amplified his story. Karen tried a final gambit, spreading rumors of Samuel being unstable, claiming that the neighborhood was unsafe under his watch. She sent letters to schools, businesses, and local media. But Samuel had already built credibility far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. Every claim was countered by verifiable records, eyewitness accounts, and the sheer weight of truth. Then one night, Harlow and Karen, desperate and reckless, attempted an ambush. They thought Samuel would be vulnerable, that they could intimidate him into kneeling, that fear would break him. They parked their cars in the shadows, moving toward his house quietly. But Samuel was waiting. Lights flickered on along the property line, illuminating the intruders. From the darkness, veterans emerged like ghosts, surrounding Harlow and Karen. A retired Navy SEAL blocked the driveway, his presence alone enough to freeze them in place. Samuel walked onto his porch, cane tapping softly against the wood, his eyes cold and steady. "You called me a nuisance. You called me a threat. You called me an interloper. And yet here I stand. Your fear, your hatred, your lies, they are no match for truth, for courage, for loyalty. Leave my home."
They hesitated. Karen's hand shook on her camera. Harlow's lips pressed into a thin line. Wallace's phone rang, summoning him back from the courthouse. He knew his influence had waned. The three realized, finally, that their power had crumbled. Samuel lowered his cane slightly, a small smile crossing his face. "This ends tonight." It did. Harlow was suspended for misconduct. Karen was removed from the HOA board, and Wallace faced a judicial review that ended his career. The flags in Oak Ridge Estates were no longer a point of contention. They became symbols of integrity, courage, and resistance against corruption. Samuel's house, his yard, and his flag remained undisturbed. But more importantly, his story had become legend. The old black veteran who refused to kneel, who called his department and had the army stand beside him, who faced the corrupt judge, the racist cop, and the petty HOA president, and won. The morning after the failed ambush, Oak Ridge Estates was eerily quiet. But Samuel Carter knew better to mistake calm for peace. He had seen too many quiet mornings in deserts, jungles, and war-torn cities to trust it. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every whisper could be a trap. And the three, the judge, the cop, and the HOA president, were not men or women to accept defeat quietly. He began the day at his kitchen table, sorting through documents and emails. Every letter of complaint, every notice, every alleged violation was cataloged. Every threat, every false claim had a corresponding defense. Samuel had learned long ago that battles weren't always fought with bullets. They could be fought with patience, evidence, and strategy. A knock on the door brought him back to the present. Lieutenant Marcus Steele, his old Gulf War comrade, stood outside, hand extended. "Morning, Major," he said, voice low. "The neighborhood's watching. They want to help. They trust you. But it's escalating. You're going to need more than courage this time." Samuel nodded. "I know. And we'll give them more than courage. We'll give them truth." Over the next week, he mobilized his network. Retired colonels, sergeants, and lieutenants coordinated legal teams. Volunteers prepared nightly patrols. Neighborhood cameras were installed, creating a surveillance network that spanned every street. Samuel's house, his yard, and his flat became an impenetrable fortress, not of steel or guns, but of people, proof, and presence. But the three had not given up. Karen, fueled by ego and desperation, began targeting Samuel's credibility. She visited local media offices, planting insinuations, exaggerations, and outright lies about him being unstable. Harlow coordinated minor legal entanglements, aiming to drain Samuel's energy and resources. Wallace quietly worked behind the scenes, trying to get higher courts to issue rulings against him. Each move was calculated, but Samuel anticipated them all. He posted public records, obtained affidavits from veterans, and used his reputation as a decorated soldier to counteract every accusation. Karen's smear campaigns backfired when neighbors began sharing their own stories of Samuel's courage and integrity. Harlow's attempts to intimidate were neutralized by the community patrols and the media coverage that highlighted his misconduct. One afternoon, Samuel received a call from an old Army intelligence officer, Colonel Darius Jenkins. "Major, we've been monitoring their movements. They're desperate, and desperation makes them reckless. You need to be ready." He set the phone down and stared out the window at the suburban streets. He murmured, "They'll strike again, and when they do, we'll be ready." That night, a coordinated attack came, not with brute force, but with deception. Harlow tried to serve an injunction directly to Samuel's home under cover of darkness, believing the absence of witnesses would allow him to intimidate the veteran. But every street was monitored, every movement tracked. Veterans and neighbors intercepted him, politely but firmly blocking his approach. "You have no jurisdiction here tonight. Turn around and go back before you make a mistake." Harlow's face twisted with rage. "You can't stop me. I have authority." "You have arrogance," Samuel interjected, stepping onto the porch, cane tapping softly. "And arrogance will not prevail." Harlow retreated, realizing that the network Samuel had built was more formidable than any badge or gavel. Karen's attempts to capture a scandalous photo were thwarted by volunteers ready with cameras of their own, ensuring that any move against Samuel would be documented and exposed.
The following morning, Samuel attended a scheduled court hearing for one of the fabricated charges. The courthouse was packed. Media crews from across the state had arrived. Veterans filled the benches, and citizens watched silently, anticipating the clash. Wallace tried to assert his authority, but Samuel's presence, backed by his army of supporters, shifted the power dynamics entirely. "I stand accused," Samuel said, addressing the court, "of disturbing the peace, of threatening my neighbors, of resisting authority. But the truth is, I have spent my life protecting peace. I have carried men from the field of fire. I have seen death and destruction in places you cannot imagine. And yet I stand here alive and unbowed. Your accusations are nothing compared to the truth of service, honor, and integrity." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the collective energy of those present made Wallace's gavel feel meaningless. Even the judge's attempts to assert control were drowned out by the rising chorus of support for Samuel.
That night, Samuel returned home to a message from Colonel Jenkins. "They're planning something bigger," the message read. "We've intercepted communications. They want to escalate, to create a scenario that forces you to bend or break. Be ready." Samuel smiled faintly. "We've been ready since the first knock." The next attack was audacious. Karen and Harlow attempted to stage a neighborhood inspection, claiming they had orders to evaluate potential hazards. They arrived with a small crew, armed with clipboards and cameras, confident that Samuel would be alone. But Samuel had anticipated this. Streets were lined with volunteers, veterans patrolling silently but visibly. Every entry point was monitored. Harlow tried to assert his authority, demanding entry, but was met with the unyielding presence of men and women who had fought alongside Samuel in the harshest conditions imaginable. "You have no authority here," Marcus Steele said again, standing firm. "Leave or you'll answer to every veteran present." Karen hissed, realizing that their schemes were collapsing. Wallace's orders had no effect, and Harlow's threats rang hollow against the network Samuel had meticulously prepared. For the first time, their confidence faltered. Over the following weeks, Samuel executed his counteroffensive. He documented every harassment attempt, every false accusation, and every act of intimidation. He worked with legal experts to file complaints against Harlow, Karen, and Wallace. Social media campaigns highlighted their corruption, turning public opinion decisively in his favor. The final confrontation came when the trio attempted a legal maneuver to seize Samuel's property, citing a mixture of bogus claims, technicalities, and loopholes. They expected the courts to bend under their influence, to finally bring Samuel to his knees. Instead, Samuel presented a meticulously prepared case. Evidence, affidavits, witness testimonies, and public records were laid out with precision. Veterans from his network testified to his character and actions. Media coverage ensured transparency. The judge overseeing the case, an impartial jurist with no ties to Wallace, reviewed the evidence. Every false claim was exposed. Every attempt to intimidate was documented. The courtroom watched in awe as the truth prevailed. Samuel's final statement was simple yet powerful. "I have been accused of defiance. I have been threatened, slandered, and harassed. But defiance is not a crime. Courage is not a threat. Integrity is not negotiable. And those who seek to bend others to their will through fear and corruption will always be exposed. I have stood my ground, and today justice stands beside me." The ruling was swift. All charges were dismissed. Harlow faced suspension and an internal investigation. Karen was removed from the HOA board and banned from holding any public office within the community. Wallace faced judicial scrutiny, resulting in his censure and eventual retirement. Samuel returned home to Oak Ridge Estates a hero, not just to the veterans and neighbors who had stood with him, but to the wider community who had followed his story. The flag above his porch fluttered proudly, a symbol of resilience, courage, and justice. For the first time in weeks, Samuel allowed himself a deep breath. The battles had been fought, the schemes dismantled, and the corrupt trio defeated. He knew that standing firm had costs, but he also knew that it had rewards far greater than fear or submission. As he watched the sunset, reflecting on the weeks of conflict, he thought of every soldier he had ever carried, every battle he had ever survived, and every life he had touched. They had all led to this moment. Samuel Carter had refused to kneel, and in refusing, he had ensured that corruption, hatred, and cowardice would not bend the world to their will. Oak Ridge Estates would remember him, and the nation would remember the story. The old black veteran who stood firm, called upon his comrades, and turned defiance into victory. Weeks passed like tense, measured hours. Samuel Carter's vigilance never wavered. Each morning, he walked his property with the deliberate steps of a soldier surveying a battlefield, cane tapping against the pavement. Behind him, veterans and volunteers patrolled, ensuring that no move from Karen, Harlow, or Wallace could take them by surprise. The three adversaries had grown reckless, desperate, and dangerous. They would strike again, but Samuel was ready. One evening, a town hall meeting became the next arena. Karen, emboldened by her allies, had called a gathering under the guise of community discussion. Her hope was to isolate Samuel, to paint him as a troublemaker, and finally humiliate him in front of the neighbors he had inspired. She imagined the moment he would be cornered, forced to kneel metaphorically, if not literally. Samuel arrived, walking into the hall with calm authority. His presence alone silenced the whispers. Behind him, veterans filled the aisles, their medals catching the light, their expressions resolute. Cameras rolled, capturing every moment. Karen rose, arms crossed, a rehearsed smile plastered on her face. "This meeting is about maintaining harmony," she announced. "Some residents have raised concerns about—" Samuel interrupted gently, his voice carrying effortlessly. "This meeting is about truth. I have heard the concerns, and I am here to answer them openly. But let us remember, truth is not shaped by fear, nor courage diminished by threats." The room shifted. Murmurs replaced whispers. Karen's composure faltered. Harlow, standing at the back, clenched his fists, realizing once again that the court of public opinion, and now reality, was no longer his to control. Samuel's address continued, measured, eloquent, yet piercing. He spoke of integrity, of standing against corruption, of the responsibility of those entrusted with power. Each word resonated with the audience. Each sentence undercut the lies Karen had so desperately tried to weave. By the time the meeting ended, Karen's influence had crumbled in the room. She left flustered, her plans unraveling. Harlow fumed silently, but Samuel had anticipated his anger would soon manifest in a last-ditch attempt. The final confrontation came on a night that could have been mistaken for ordinary. Shadows stretched across the streets, and the quiet hum of the neighborhood was deceptive. Harlow, blind to the preparations, attempted a late-night intimidation, confronting Samuel at his front porch, believing the darkness would give him leverage. Karen lurked nearby, filming, and Wallace had issued back-channel instructions from afar, hoping to create chaos. But Samuel's preparation was meticulous. Every street corner had a watch, every alley monitored. Harlow stepped onto Samuel's property only to be surrounded. Veterans emerged silently from the shadows, blocking exits, each one exuding calm authority. Karen's camera was taken from her hands by a volunteer, ensuring that no falsified evidence could be created. Samuel stepped forward, cane tapping softly, his silver hair glinting under the porch light. "You've tried every trick, every lie, every threat, and yet here you stand, exposed. This ends tonight." Harlow's jaw clenched. "You can't stop me." "I already have. The law, truth, and courage are on my side. You have nothing but arrogance." At that moment, the national media coverage, streaming live, captured the scene. Every act of aggression by Harlow and Karen was witnessed, recorded, and broadcast. The public outrage was immediate. Internal investigations were launched against Harlow. Karen faced legal consequences for harassment and misuse of HOA authority. Wallace, exposed for corruption, was forced into retirement under federal scrutiny. The neighborhood itself became a stage for justice. Samuel's home, once a target, now symbolized resilience. Flags flew freely across Oak Ridge Estates, not just Samuel's, but dozens of neighbors who had joined the movement. A wave of civic pride and unity swept through the community, inspired by one man's refusal to kneel. In the following weeks, Samuel worked to solidify the victory. Legal settlements ensured the HOA could no longer harass residents unfairly. Harlow's badge was revoked. Karen and Wallace were removed from positions of authority permanently. Samuel's story, carried across news outlets and social media, became emblematic of standing firm against corruption, racism, and entitlement. Finally, one calm evening, Samuel stood on his porch looking out over his yard. The flags waved gently in the breeze, and the neighborhood felt alive in a way it had not before. Veterans, neighbors, and friends gathered nearby, sharing quiet laughter and conversation. The battle had been won, not just for Samuel, but for the principles he embodied. Colonel Jenkins approached, clapping a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "You did it, Major. They couldn't touch you." Samuel smiled, eyes reflecting decades of service, sacrifice, and now vindication. "We did it. This wasn't just my fight. It was every soldier who stood beside me, every neighbor who refused to bow, every person who believed in truth and courage." The story of Samuel Carter, the old black veteran who refused to kneel before a corrupt judge, a racist cop, and a petty HOA president, spread far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. Schools used it as a lesson in integrity. Veterans shared it at reunions. Citizens carried it into conversations and forums. It became a symbol of unwavering resolve in the face of injustice. Years later, Samuel would look back on those weeks as a crucible, a time when the true measure of courage was revealed. And though he had faced intimidation, lies, and hatred, he had emerged not just unbowed, but triumphant. The flag above his porch waved proudly, a testament to endurance, defiance, and ultimate justice. Samuel Carter had refused to kneel, and in doing so, he had changed a neighborhood, inspired a nation, and proven that courage, when combined with strategy and integrity, could overcome even the darkest corruption. Oak Ridge Estates would remember him forever.